Hey everybody, this is what I wanted you to learn from the second week of materials. So let me full screen this. Here we go. Okay, so I wanted you to look at the basics of government, basically why we have a government, what is its purpose, and then the types of government that there are. Okay, so your activity that you did where you live on a deserted island with a whole bunch of other people, and you needed to create a set of rules for them. That is, the whole purpose of that activity was for you to understand basically why there's government. Why do we have rules for society? And a lot of your rules that you made, as I was reading through those, were things like making sure that nobody hoards any resources, making sure that people's rights aren't tramped on. Basically the things that our government does for its people. Okay, so that's basically what government does. It organizes and orders our society so it can function without people interfering in each other's lives. Okay, well, that brings us to what types of government are there. So the first two here, these are types of democracies. There's a direct democracy, and this all relates to the activity that you did where you basically researched the types of government. Okay, direct democracy is where you represent yourself. There's no president, there's no senators, there's no representatives. You get to be that person. You are the voice in government. So when they vote for laws, you'll vote for yourself. You'll get together in the assembly and vote for yourself. That works in really, really small towns. It doesn't really work in big towns like Cincinnati or a state like Ohio or nationally in the United States. So what we've gone to is something called representative democracy, where you elect somebody to represent you. There's a state senator in Ohio that represents you. There's a Ohio senator that represents you in the Congress. The President of the United States is involved in representative democracy. The key, though, is a lot of times representative democracy is intertwined with the term republic. A republic is a country that elects its leaders. Same thing. Those terms can be used interchangeably. Okay, there's dictatorship, which are authoritarian governments. Those are governments where you have one person or a small group of people control the entire government. They say what the people can and cannot do, and they can change their minds whenever they want. If they decide one day they want their people to have free speech, the next day they don't, they can do that. And then there's monarchies, which can be absolute, where a king or queen rules by themselves, or constitutional monarchy, where the king or queen's power is limited by a constitution. Okay, most governments, most monarchies, where you have power passed on from one generation to the next, it stays in the same family. Most of them are constitutional monarchies today. Okay, you also had an assignment where you took a look at economic systems. Okay, students interchange economic system and governments all the time. Governments set up, they're not the same. Governments set up rules for society. Economic system sets up rules for economic or monetary exchange between people or groups of people. Okay, there are really three kinds. A traditional economy is where the tradition of the society tells you what you're going to do. A lot of primitive societies have these. So, for instance, if your father is a shoemaker, you'll be a shoemaker. If your grandparents are farmers, well, then they pass that on to you and you'll become a farmer. Okay? A lot of non-developed societies have these kinds of economies. There's a market system, capitalism, which is what we have in the United States. You get to make your own economic decisions. What you buy, what you sell, the job you have, all that is depending on what you want. Okay, your needs. You make those decisions. Versus a command economy, communism, where the government makes decisions for you. So in our system, you decide, hey, I want to be a teacher. Okay, you can go to college and become a teacher. That's your choice. Command economy, the government tells you this is your job. We don't need teachers. We need, people to construct buildings. So that's going to be your job. So the government tells you what you're going to do in the best interest of society. Okay? Then a lot of economic systems today are a mixed system where sometimes called socialism, where you have aspects of both market and command. In some situations, people get to make decisions, and in some situations, the government will make decisions for people. Okay, we sort of have that in the United States. Think of something like Social Security. Those of you who have a job know that you pay Social Security that goes to people 65 and older. It's their retirement benefits. You can't decide whether or not to pay Social Security. The government says they're commanding you to do this. Okay, and then you'll collect it when you turn 65. Okay, but most nations today are of a mixed economy. Okay, now the next thing is that I wanted you to learn is moving into more specifically to the United States. What is our government? Okay, we have a government that was influenced by the Enlightenment, which you learned in the 9th grade. I don't want to go through the entire Enlightenment, but for the most part, people in the world decided to use logic and reason and math to define the world. Okay, and government was part of that as well. Philosophers started writing things about government. Remember, this is the time of monarchies. They said that absolute monarchies aren't ruling very well. It should be the people that should determine what the government is, and that's something called a social contract. You guys know a contract is an agreement between two sides. Okay, a social contract is an agreement between the government and the people. The people give up some of its rights to do whatever they want to live in an ordered society that's created by a government, and it's best if this is written down in the Constitution. Okay, we have that today, right? We have a written constitution that tells the government what it can and cannot do. We have rights that it's not allowed to, government's not allowed to take away: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to assemble, and so forth. And if the government doesn't protect our rights, then we have a right to overthrow it. Okay, now when you think of overthrowing a government, you might think of, a violent revolution. But think about electing a new president. That's an overthrow of the government. Adding an amendment to the Constitution, this kind of changes the government. It overthrows part of the government. Okay, if we elect a whole new Congress and we say, all right, the United States House of Representatives is now in charge. Right now, the Democrats are in charge. But what if in the fall the Republicans get in charge, have the majority? Well, then we've overthrown, sort of in a way, the government at that time. Okay. Now, our first written Constitution in the United States was called the Articles of Confederation, and it failed. Our first government didn't work, mainly because it gave too much power to the states, not enough power to the national government. So when a crisis arose between the states, there wasn't a strong central government that could step in and say, enough, here's how we're going to solve this problem. But there were some things of the Articles of Confederation, before we talk about why they failed, that were important. Number one, this was the first time that things were written down. A plan for government, a constitution, was written down, and it put obligations and, more importantly, limits on government. The government cannot do this. The government cannot take away individual rights. Okay? So that's the important thing. This is what the Articles of Confederation look like. They're not on display anywhere, as far as I know, because we don't like to display our failures. We like to display our good ideas. So that's why we have the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence on display, but not the Articles of Confederation. Now, basically, this tells you what some of the articles, some of the specifics of the Articles of Confederation. I'm just going to highlight a couple of these. Each state retains its sovereignty. The states had the power. They gave power to the national government and told the national government what it could and could not do. Okay? Down here, the states gave the federal government taxes. Okay, so the federal government had to ask for taxes. States didn't have any money. They were in debt from the Revolutionary War, so they didn't have any money to give the federal government. So basically, if the government doesn't have money, it can't really do much. So the national government under the Articles of Confederation couldn't do much. Okay, it says Congress served as a final court for disputes between the states. If there was, a conflict between North and South Carolina, the national government under the Articles of Confederation was supposed to solve that problem. There was no judicial branch. Okay, it was Congress under that article, the legislative branch, that was supposed to solve those legal problems. Here's the big one. The Articles can only be altered by approval of Congress with ratification by all of the state legislatures. All of the states never agreed on what should be done, so therefore they could never make any changes to the Articles of Confederation. So when it was apparent that the Articles of Confederation weren't working and were going to fail, the states couldn't agree on how to change the Articles to save the government. So what they did was they went ahead and they created another government. The Constitution that we have today. Okay, basically, because things were unregulated, there was no tax money going to the national government. There were trade wars between states. After the Revolutionary War, things were pretty chaotic under the Articles of Confederation. Okay, the economy deteriorated. States were printing their own money. The government under the Articles could not figure out a way to solve this problem. So, by 1786, some states said, you know what we need to do? We need to start over. We need to create a new government, and that became those calls eventually became the Constitution that we have today. Okay, but kind of the last straw under the Articles of Confederation that made a lot of Americans realize maybe we need to make some changes was this thing called Shays' Rebellion. Okay, it happened in Massachusetts. Banks were foreclosing on farms. Foreclosure is when somebody isn't making their payments to the bank, and because of that, they're kicked off their land or their home. Okay, so these farmers were worried, led by Daniel Shays. These all were Revolutionary War veterans. They couldn't pay their debts because Massachusetts said their debts had to be paid in cash. They didn't have any cash, so they're going to get thrown off their land. So they decided to take matters into their own hands, and they went to 1,500 of them went to the Capitol in Springfield, Massachusetts, and actually took their guns and went to the courthouse and took over the courthouse. And they said, sorry, you're not going to foreclose on our land. We have guns here. We're going to prevent you from doing that, to the courts there. And as you probably realize, that's something that's really totally against the law. You can't have armed group of citizens taking over government buildings. So we would expect today the cops would come in, or the FBI, or the state militia to take care of that. However, states didn't have an army. There wasn't a national army either. So Congress actually, under the Articles of Confederation, got together $530,000 and said, we can't have open rebellion in our country. What if this spread to other states? Then our new government is going to be gone. The British are going to come in and take us back over, and we won't be a free country anymore. So what they decided to do was put $530,000 together and ask the states, hey, can we, if we provide you the money, can you provide the soldiers? Every state except for Virginia refused. Now keep in mind, this was happening in Massachusetts. Even Massachusetts said, nah, we're not going to do that. They took a pass on that. So eventually a private army was hired, and it put down Shays' Rebellion. But it showed the people, and especially the government, that when there's armed rebellion in the country, we don't have any way of putting that down. That's not good. There could be open rebellion in the entire United States, all 13 states, and we wouldn't be able to do anything about it. So that's when they realized, maybe we should change the government a little bit. Okay? All right, now your last assignment was to go into, start looking at the Constitution and read through the Constitution. We'll talk more about the Constitution next week. So good luck with everything, and please let me know if you have any questions. You can come to my office hours at 8 a.m. If that's too early for you, send an email. I'll try to hold some office hours in the afternoons as well, after 2 o'clock. So good luck, and let me know if you need help.